and dreamed myself wrong, my strange and weary road, my unkempt figure, my blue whisper, winter god, whose center, in the moment, unwilling to be warm, eternal the winter, eternal the wind, unmaking your will and whisper, my anger, my lantern, my spaceless wick. But how, my tenuous prayer board, can a supplicant balancing on the surface know anything about depth? Struggling out of the waves, moon a little red, illegible, whole sky starless in the late hour, I didn't tell you, wrote into me the answer or a map to follow, boardless and battered, heaved ashore on the pull-back day in the effort of ache. Where did I swim in from? Water that wholly disappears into air or does not disappear. Speaking underwater because I'm afraid to be heard. Nothing after no one waiting for me. Sky and sky, the same grave gray that terrifies, turning the page of breath where I left myself without sound. Into the air I spell each spring like swan. Noises from the next room keep you awake. God that was a noise in the night at the foot of the bed, claiming kinship or revival, transcribing the ghost notes onto the sheets. We who each divine ourself in spite of ourselves, running wildly, boards under our arms, back into the sea. You have to, if you've ever seen it, been in the ocean where people are surfing, you see as soon as they come out of the sea, they have to run back in to catch the next wave. In the case of warmth, the oceans will rise, strange cup to move through after the continents came together, after you swam crazy through the storm to shore, after you asked for it, after you drove yourself relentlessly into the sea. We listened to one gust after the other, a gorgeous scale in the most ordinary range, drumming the time of the sea into a signature of leaves, 20 minutes of ecstasy, blue, and after the blue, blue-white, a buoy, a sandpiper, a wholesale slaughter of blue. Either way, the harp's plucked chords like the fog or the answer of water dissolved into the shore's copious footnotes, transcribing the music onto ebbing surface, a missing word where continents rub together, disappear or dispel the notion there is any such word worth knowing, a bridge collapsing along unquelled cadences of sound. When you whisper yourself to eternity, whose name did you whisper, and into whose ear? And this is the last poem in that cycle of poems. A body slides through the water, cleanly angling for the rocky shore. Eternal, internal zephyr. Men have dashed themselves to death to feel the racing thrill. How do you pronounce year after year home or death? The ocean avenue is a bridge ready to collapse. Pond evaporates to air. Your breath made a bridge. Impatient penitents race for the exit. Lean close, saint everyone. I live neither here nor there. The ocean scrambling itself to answer, sketching you in pieces everywhere in an odd scene, paddling against the current, straining for shore. You drew yourself in time a backwards sign, surfing on the breath, wishing to be not an echo of the ocean, but its escalation. And when I cast myself across the surface, I stopped wondering, would I float or would I drown? So that is a series of poems from my work thinking about Alice Coltrane. I'd like to read this poem next to you. I just flew back to the United States from Canada. I was in Calgary, Alberta. And when you are Muslim and you're flying in the United States, you are always a subject to the searches. And they say it's a random search, but I have been now 20 plus years selected for the random search. So I know it is something more than random. They're choosing me on purpose. So anyways, this poem is called Random Search. Here we go. Yeah, I recognize that guy. A random search. Who will in the night unpedaling lose himself in fealty, his crime heartbreaking, confessed and festering? What undresses in the ground, lost in perjury? He is to be tried for the nearly unforgivable sins of naming ordinary stars after himself, drinking coffee without labor laws, marking time by the icicle melting in the cave. Chaste and chastened, he is touched by you. His body changes as he sinks under your hands, the world's opulent answer, his silent umbrage. A submerged body arrows to the surface, not by intent, but because it is buoyant. He wants to save you, wants to save everyone. Hand him back his glasses, and he tells you to renounce meat and demand an end to inheritance. And then he's off to recite Arabic in the gate area. What else is left but to be human here? I like to read you this poem because I wrote it in July, 1 July, and I had come back from Bombay, Mumbai, however you like to say. And when I was there, I went to this curious place called the Haji Ali Dargah, which they sing Qawwali music there. And so I tell the story of how that, you may know the story already, I don't know, but why that Dargah came to be where it is. So that's this, but the story takes place after I've come back from India and I'm at my house. And I'm trying to chop a tree down in the backyard. And I can't do it. I'm having a hard time chopping it. So anyhow, this poem is called Chopping the Birch. And I suppose like any good poem, it's ostensibly, you think it's about chopping a tree down, but really it is about trying to find, it's another argument with God, basically, which I do that a lot. With an axe I hack at the birch's hard trunk and fold paper boats into the mouth of day. I wonder what opens inside wild the Novembering darkness. Condemned to this chore by the encroaching freeze, convinced it is holy, but thinking only of July, a paparazzi of fireflies ablaze in the yard. I had just returned from Mumbai, where on the last day, delirious with heat, I had made my way across the causeway to the Haji Ali Dargah to hear the Qawwali singers. And as I listened, I wondered, am I even in the world? The story goes that Haji Ali left for pilgrimage, but on the way his ship was wrecked in the storm and his body was lost at sea. When did I climb into this body, touched and made by 100 people who daily also climb inside? The paparazzi of fireflies chase me indoors. Like God, they want only to see me. And like God, I want only to be seen. As for Haji Ali, his body washed ashore of all places in the world at the exact point he initially embarked. In November, The tree will not be chopped, its paper it will not yield. And as for God, even if it is true that we choose our own bondage, how, when you are expelled from the garden, do you still sing to him that did it to you? So that is the poem called the Haji Ali Dargah. I wanted to read a couple of poems that I did not write myself, but were written by the Mauritian poet Ananda Devi, and so she is, from Andhra Pradesh ancestrally, and Telugu was her mother tongue. But then when she started to go to school in Mauritius, of course, she learned French. So she writes and speaks and writes in French now. And her book is called When the Night Agrees to Speak to Me. And it came from HarperCollins in India in 2021. Came out in 2021. So these are poems by Ananda Devi that she wrote in French that I translated. So I'll just read a couple of these. At dawn you will descend barefoot, like a silent cat on crimson paws, to drink from the river. You will slip down the bank, foggy with pleasure, in the silver tracks of trampled snails. To the south you will search for some proof you lived here once, had children, friends, a love that lasted, but nothing's left of all that. Just the low sky, the river grasses, wild water, abandoned beehives. Your ears strain to hear the voices of those absent until the night at last agrees to speak to you. Here's another poem from this same cycle. And why would I keep you from leaving when the silt has hardened, when seaweed crossed the threshold, carrying with it the faint smell of sea? When the sand is so black that the wind on your tongue tastes of drowning, and the salt pierces your skin. Let the truth leave these bodies, shipwrecked on their reefs, silt in their mouths, shore stretching away from the rack line, rubble, dreams and memories fleeing, submerged faces, and of the island there only remains footsteps echoing of those long since gone. There came excuse me, I will not read that one. Okay, we'll read this one. Also from the same cycle. Too much absence, and so we left, our lips long stained by the sweat of our muzzles, engraving on our aged hands the powdery snow of our veils, softening our eyes, struck by too many skies. So much noise cannot but silence the night. So bent we walk on our broken toes, women of sand. The wind erases us. We will dance no more upon thorns. When the night agrees to speak to me, it is with a blade that slices into the places of certainty, that carves love into loneliness. When the night agrees to speak to me, it is to tell me the words that did not know how to cut into my hands, an infamy long unsaid, sweet lines of madness. When the night agrees to speak to me, it is with its back turned, because neither tree nor a sapling grows from my smooth skin. I haven't suffered enough, nor laughed well, nor loved enough. It will not be content with just a little, neither lover nor enemy. It wants me to dance. As I lie now in the branches of the mango tree, barely a whirl or eddy in the glass of the sky, it holds back its hem from my soiled remains. I am nothing but mud, about which the future has nothing to say. And then I'll read one more poem by Ananda Devi. Short. You don't know how to age. Your wounds have opened you to all the winds. You think you know yourself, but all you will have is emptiness. Writing will have been nothing but the briefest of mysteries. So all of those poems that I just read to you are from a long cycle of 30 poems by Ananda Devi that appears in this little book, When the Night Agrees to Speak to Me. And 30 poems, I don't know, it makes a month, I suppose, 30 days in a month, kind of a period of time, a month as a cycle of the moon as well, which maybe has relationships to her life as a woman, femininity, something like that. Interesting enough. Okay, so I'll read a couple of more, maybe 3 or 4 more poems to close, and then if anyone wants to ask me any questions or anything like that, you can certainly do. This is a poem that is called Crumpled Up. And I was at this artist colony, and there were these 2 artists that were doing a project where they selected items of refuse or garbage, and they would give this to the writers that were there, and then we were meant to kind of respond to whatever we were given, whatever kind of weird object we were given, to write about it. And what I was given was a crumpled up ball of an old newspaper from, 30 plus years earlier. So my poem is called Crumpled Up. I just want to say one other thing. This artist colony where I was staying, it's called the Headlands Art Center, and it's actually on an old army installation, like an old army base has been converted into an artist colony now. So this poem is called Crumpled Up. And the 2 artists were a woman named Lenka Clayton and a guy named Philip Andrew Clark. Debris crushed to flowers made summer, you will, thought, swam, shard, have this ember, rendered member of the body whose urge surged, swerved, and shine, ocean opens, shown hours to contrail, pretends to sketch a shape of flower against infinite information in the sky. Data mind internal, eye in formation of a day to mind the steeple war, a steep war, mind the memoir of shore, a meme war fought on the internet where, however, there are interments fast parsing the rationing shore, endlessness warned between each wounded party marked, intersects, insects and sex descend to spend the real, their wings beginning that summer's gnawing groan of sex, summer leaves shirring. You can at these moments open your mouth and imagine the San Francisco Chronicle, May 15th, 1974, crumpled up, sent forth, first paper to read, then discarded, released, found by Lenka, one of an endless piece of information met for a moment, given to Philip, recited, received, recited, receded, recedes, given to Cosm, passed through the city, the situation and ovation, oration, oblation, ablation. Show me what you pray for and eat. Save now in this flesh archive what ought not be lost. Maker of most light, tossed sun, rise up from Rodeo Beach. Leave me bereft, left all those bunkers in the hills, their doors rusted shut by metal or paper or human touch, whether concrete, metal, paper, or flesh. We do mark time on this earth. So that is, you can see a little bit in there how I was exploring the way that the sounds of the words blur into one another a little bit. And for me, sometimes writing in English, I want the English of the poem to kind of, do more than what is, ordinarily done, and to lean into the fact that these sounds, the pure vowels, the sounds of language themselves can hold some form of a meaning. And you may not know this, there's no reason you would, but English is not my first language. It is of the languages I knew before English as a young child, I don't know any of them anymore. So if I have a mother tongue, it's English. But it was not the language I spoke first. That was Urdu. And then I also learned as a child, because we grew up in, I was born in England, but then I came back to India as a young child. And I was raised at least part of that time in Vellore. And my one grandmother spoke Tamil, my other grandmother spoke Telugu, some other people in the house spoke Farsi. So I didn't speak one single language as a child. I spoke all different ones, it's you like 1-year-old or 2-year-old and you're learning all the different words, and I just spoke them together. And so then we moved to Canada and I learned English. So I feel like my relationship to English itself as a language is very expansive, but also very tenuous. Okay, let me read a couple more poems, 2 more poems. How about that? This is a poem that is called Golden Boy. And Golden Boy is a statue on the top of the Parliament building in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And that's where my family moved from India, from Vellore, India to Winnipeg, Manitoba. It was a system shock, because it's very different, 2 very different places. At any rate, as a very young child, I loved that statue. Golden Boy. Almost afraid I am in the annals of history to speak, and by speaking be seen by man or God. Such then debt in light be paid. Atop the Manitoba Parliament building in Winnipeg, what a beacon to dollars, food, or God shines. I hallow starvation, this nation a notion beneath the body, hollowing its stomach to emptiness, and in breath the river empties. Whoso spoke the craft borne along long echo and echelon, grains of light and space, we with one another wait the soul, not the spirit, breathe through, spirited, went or wend, why true we've woven a dozen attempts. These tents, pitched on the depth, be made by pen, may perch atop the temple pool, and proven these riches of wheat and cherries and prunes, what washes over woven ocean, frayed I am, most, sir, desired, sired in wind, seared and warned, once in wild Umiak sworn. We parley to mend, be conned, be bent. Come, now called to document your meant intent, your indented mind. Haul, O star, your weight in eons. There, in prayer, money, morrow more you owe, and over time God spends the spent river melt into summer, that sound out the window, sound out the spender. Where does the red river road end? And in what language can prayer or commerce be offered? ender of senses, pensive atop plural spires, be spoken or mended, broken and meant for splendor, my mentor. I like that poem to be seen on the page because you would know then the words, the different words that kind of sound like each other, and which ones are kind of meant. There is like a texture, I guess, that you would say that I'm trying to create, a texture in sound. There was a word in there I might have told you, a word umiak, which you may know. It's in the Inuit people in northern Canada, it's a kind of boat that they used to sail. As we say, kayak is the small one, umiak is a larger boat. And so the last poem that I will read to you, thank you very much for being here and for inviting me in on the screen. I hope you could hear me properly. I don't know. And I don't see your faces, so I don't even know who is there listening to me. But I'll read a poem that's called Yield. And yield, of course, it means two different things. I think this is also very interesting. To yield is to surrender or give up, right? One yields in a struggle. Or you yield when you're driving. You can yield to the other person in the car. But a yield is also a farming term. A yield is what you've harvested from your garden. What was the yield? And so this poem uses both of the uses of that word, yield. Why did you not answer when I sent the shrikes to strike the pane of the sky? What did you hear when I called out in the night? I have another life now. We dug up the lawn and cut back the roses to their roots and planted instead fava beans, chard, a fig tree, 3 papayas. These are things that would never grow in northern shores. The great Mexican sunflowers whose seeds the parrots eat. All the family photographs in which I do not appear. The one part of my name no one else can pronounce. It is a kind of hell not knowing whether or not you heard me. Did you hear me? The planet continues its spin, but I am impaled on a thorn of silence. In the city on the mesa, between mountain and ocean, we spend days cutting back the lantana so the monarch butterflies no longer come. And in their place we planted avocado trees, a pomegranate, parsley, and corn. What could God have said to you that I did not? We do not break the soil, but build on top. We do not separate the crops, but scatter the seeds. We feed ourselves in every season. Marco takes bags of beans to every neighbor as a gift, and only one gruffly refuses, saying, "We don't want any of that." In the night, the shrikes come to say what you could not. In all the years of voiceless song, what have you heard? On my own and far from my source, I had to make a home. So we scattered the seeds. We made a home. Thank you for listening. That will be the end of my reading. But I'm happy to answer. If you have a question for me, you can ask a question for me. If we have any more time, I don't know when we are supposed to be finished. Hello.
Thank you, sir. On behalf of
Hello.
Thank you, sir. Am I audible? Thanks, sir. On behalf of my college, Manbhum Mahavidyalaya, I extend a hearty thanks to you What of our audience have a question to you?
It's a very important question. Hello, Professor Ali. I am Dr. Pushparal, Professor Department of English, Pakura University. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes. Okay. So it's an extremely enjoyable session. Listening your reading of poems, and the diasporic sensibility that is quite apparent in the poems that you have read, including those which are by Mahavidyalaya. Right, and mine just is not a question actually, yeah, kind of a clarification, or what is your take on this? That you were talking about your exposure to multiple languages, and as a diasporic poet, how do you find this multiple use of language, or this kind of a battle with language? How do you actually cope with it as you settle down in a place, in a new home in California? How do you cope with this kind of a linguistic variety? That's what actually I want to learn. How actually it is related to your identity as a diasporic poet?
Yeah, it is. It's something that I think about a lot. It's not only in relationship to language, of course, but also, the cultural traditions and the literary traditions themselves. I was raised in the West, and so there are certain things in, certain ways in which I am, very American, and yet my parents were Muslim, were first generation immigrants from India. Although my father's family lives in Pakistan now, they were both born in India. And I myself traveled back many times throughout my childhood and young adulthood. So I do feel kind of, neither one thing or another, or both things in a way. And so, as I work in the poetic form that I use, the writers that I read, the ways that I'm influenced, it's global. It is not solely American. And English as a language by now is also, of course, we all know, is a global language. And it is used differently in different places. They're really different iterations of the same root language. But as years go on, each kind of community that uses a language makes it their own. And because we have this world now, this super network connected world that is bring me to you in the first place right now, right? Is that we influence each other in ways that were inconceivable even 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And I think that's great. I think it's richer. It brings more potential for expression in language, and more potential, of course, since we live in a precarious world right now, climate precarious and politically unstable world. It gives us a greater chance at reconciliation, and it gives us a greater chance at trying to make complex, forge complex solutions for some of the problems that we are facing. So I appreciate that. I don't know if that answered your question at all, but sort of went off on a tangent, but nonetheless.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Yes.
Just another intervention. Thank you very much for translating Ananda Devi. And I was personally feeling that there is a gap, because when I wanted to read Ananda Devi, which was available in French but not in English translations, at least from India. So you have done a great job in translating Ananda Devi.
Thank you.
But my question is that do you have any specific reason for picking up Ananda Devi? Because your interest is obviously in travel, both in space and time, as you spoke in terms of travel through the seas, passage through the seas, and also bodies moving through the sky. So there is obviously a kind of interest in the travel specifically bodies travel, and that is why I was thinking whether there is any specific reason for translating Ananda Devi.
Yes. Thank you for, I'm sorry, I'm plugging my computer in because the battery is low. Thank you for that question. I found her, the answer may hopefully be interesting. It might not be interesting. Is it plugged in? Hold on, I have to plug this in. I plugged it into my computer, but it's not plugged in. So here's the answer. I found Ananda Devi's book quite by accident. I was not in India, I was in Paris, and I was at the bookstore looking for something else, and I saw the book on the table at the bookstore. And it was a beautiful little book. It had this sort of really hot pink cover, and then the letters was really bright yellow. So it was really distinctive. It looked like the book, it looked like a sari, like the color of a sari, really, really brightly colored and beautiful. And so I picked it up and I started to read it, and in French. And I found myself really attracted to the life that it described. It was a life so different from my own. At that time I was probably in my early 30s, and this book was written by a woman in her late 50s. I was at the beginning of my relationship that I was, that I'm still, in with my partner, and she is writing about the end of a relationship of a 30-year marriage. I'm a younger man. She's writing about being a woman. Going into menopause, for example, in that poem, later on in that poem, she talks about giving birth. So she's talking about all these experiences so far outside my own experience, this whole other life. And the way she was writing also, in my own work, I found myself, tending more towards the abstract and towards the musical. And her work, if you could hear it as I was reading to you the translations, I hope you could see how, very different it is from my own work. And so that too, as a poet translating some other writer, if I'm going to translate some writer who writes just like me in another language, that's not interesting or exciting to me. But to find somebody who's writing in a really different way and writing completely different type of poems, then I'm very attracted to that. And so what happened was I came from Paris, I came to India, and I was going to Chennai, actually. And so when I was in Chennai, I had a driver who was going to take me around where do you want to go? What do you want to see here? So of course I want to go to Mahavidyalaya, and I want to see Arjuna's penance, the stone carvings, and I went down to Oroville, and it's down there. And then I said one day, the drivers actually said, we should, I will take you to Pondicherry. And so we went down in Pondicherry, and I went in the French part of the town, and I was sitting there drinking coffee, and I had that book with me. And I just, for some reason, being in, what used to be French India, colonized by the French, I started to translate the poem in my notebook. I didn't have a dictionary or anything with me. I was just doing it like first draft, first thought, And then from there I went to Kerala, and I was staying in Kerala for a month, and I was by the Arabian Sea, on a cliff overlooking the Arabian Sea. I was in Varkala, the town of Varkala, and it was there that I decided I really wanted to translate the book. There was something about being in that place that was sort of an in-between place, an international place. And when you think about Mauritius, its history as part of the colonization of the world, really, because it was the way station, of course, as the Europeans sailed down the coast of Africa. The Portuguese, they had colonies in Angola and Mozambique. So there were their way stations, like to supply their ships. And the English, of course, were in South Africa, and the Dutch were in South Africa. And so the French had Mauritius. That's where they were going to stop on their boats and get up, So So it was sort of this crossroads, this in-between place, and a place of multiple languages. Because of the history of the colonization of Mauritius, they had people speaking English, they had people speaking French, they had people speaking their own kind of like Mauritian Creole kind of combination between the two. And so there was something attractive to me about her as a writer that just drew me to her work. And her novels and fiction are quite well known in France and around the world. Her poetry isn't. And her novels and fiction had been translated before and continue to be translated, but I'm the only one at the moment who is working on her poetry. So I've done this book, and then there's a new book of poetry that I'm currently working on translating right now.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for that question.
Okay, continue, please. Thank you very much on behalf of our college that you agreed to read some of your poems, and really very engaging, engrossing and beautiful poems, and new ideas have been explored. So I express my gratitude and thanks to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope to see you in person soon.
Okay, that's my pleasure. Thank you. So now we'll move on to our next speaker. Sir, am I audible, Professor Sawan?
Yes.
Right.
Yes, I can hear you.
So now, our next speaker is Dr. Omid Sarwal. He is Melbourne-based. Am I audible?
Yes, I can hear you.
আগে ঠিক ছিল, ওখানে একটা অফ আছে, এখানে একটা অন আছে, নিচে তাহলে প্রবলেম হবে, এখানে ব্রডকাস্ট হচ্ছে। একবার জিজ্ঞেস করো, যাবো ওটা বন্ধ করতে বলে।
No, the broadcast is fine. There is no issue with the broadcast. There must be some issue with the machines in the seminar hall.
Can you guys hear me?
ঠিক আছে,
So now I would like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Omid Sarwal. Dr. Sarwal is a Melbourne-based academic, writer, translator, and former radio broadcaster. He is the founding convener of Australia-India Interdisciplinary Research Network, co-founder of the Australian Today News Network, and founder of Kula Press. Dr. Sarwal has an MA, MPhil, and PhD in English literature from Jawaharlal Nehru University. Dr. Sarwal is an interdisciplinary scholar and translator whose research covers areas in post-colonial literature, migration and diaspora, cross-cultural relations and diplomacy, cinema and media, and international business. He has many books to his credit, prominent being Wanderings in India, Bollywood and its others, Labels and Locations, Salam, Bollywood, South Asian Diaspora Narratives, The Dancing God, and the Celestial Dancers. So, over to you, Dr.